In these days, we have to be aware that it's 1 year that Mahsa Amini, at the age of 22, was murdered in the prisons of this Iranian regime. For what reason? For nothing. Because she was purely adjusting her veil. That showed the face, the brutal face of an illiberal regime and caused the Iranian society to engage itself in protests, taking the streets of Iran's towns and villages with the motto, "Women, Life, Freedom." We saw the reaction of a regime that couldn't handle democratic protests, that couldn't handle and was not willing to handle democratic freedoms, and reacted by the abuse of human rights. More than 500 people were killed, over 20,000 arrested, tortured, and maltreated by the security forces. Death sentences increased rapidly, were not only issued but also executed. The European Parliament and our subcommittee have reacted, of course, to it in several occasions. Already in October 22, we condemned the systematic violence. We had resolutions in January, in last March, calling on the European institutions to react rigidly to defend human rights. We were talking at the end of April in Geneva with the members of the independent international fact-finding mission established by the UN Human Rights Council and the UN Special Rapporteur, Mr. Rehman, whom we have the pleasure to hearing very soon here in our committee. We organized a full week with other committees and institutions in the European Parliament together of solidarity with the Iran people, and also organized exchanges of views on international level to support the initiative of the world's democratic family to defend freedom and democracy. Let me conclude with an eye on the recent ongoings in Iran, a regime that suppresses its people, poisons and kills its children, and take it as a symbol, hinders a father to visit the grave of his daughter, put him in prison because he wanted to visit the grave at 1 year's memory of the murdering of his daughter. A system like that is done. It has lost all the legitimacy that you need to keep up your government in a sustainable way. Not only legitimacy, that is finished, and let us also say, we know the day will come. In this spirit, we would like to have our meeting today, supporting the freedom fighters of this country, supporting all those who take high risks to defend their liberty, to stand up and to speak out. We are more than happy to have with us today Javaid Rehman, I mentioned it already, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, Gilda Sahibi, journalist and author and expert on the situation in the Middle East, and Azadeh Kian, sociologist and expert on Iran and women's rights, Université Paris Cité. All three of them will communicate with us in a hybrid mode, will be online. Our apologies. The UN Special Rapporteur has to leave after our conversation because the ongoings in Geneva require him to go to the next meeting. So please, my apologies to Gilda and to Azadeh that once we have heard Mr. Rehman, we immediately go in and exchange questions and answers, and afterwards hear our representatives, Sahebi and Kian, and enter into a second round of conversation. Now let me ask Mr. Rehman whether he is connected with us. I would be pleased to see that. Hi again. We met already in Geneva, and we are more than happy to having you here with us, Mr. Rehman. On behalf of your very specific and important function, could you perhaps, for some 8 minutes, give your take on the current situation?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for this generous invitation. I hope that I'm audible and I'm visible to all colleagues and participants in this very important meeting. I begin by thanking the European Parliament, the Subcommittee on Human Rights, for once again giving me an opportunity to speak directly to you. I'm very grateful, and I will make good use of the time that has been generously allocated to me by yourself. As has been mentioned by the Chair, since September 2022, the brave people of Iran have been facing the worst forms of violations of human rights. Ethnic, linguistic, and religious minorities continue to suffer from systematic and systemic persecution, targeting, and harassment. Women and girls of Iran are targeted with the most serious assault on their fundamental human rights and human dignity. The morality police, the cause of much detestation and aggravation, has lately been redeployed, with women and girls being confronted, detained, and harassed. These policies are intended to further violate women's rights and their dignity by attempt to enforce the hijab. As you're aware, the death in custody of the morality police of Jina Mahsa Amini on 16th of September 2022 unleashed one of the strongest waves of protests and civil unrest Iran has seen during the past 4 decades. She was arrested for allegedly failing to comply with Iran's strict rules on women's dress by wearing an improper hijab. The death in custody of Ms. Amini is unfortunately a tragic reflection of the violence against girls and women of Iran. In her case, there are also clear implications with an ethnic and religious dimension. However, the law of enforced hijab and the manner of its enforcement by state authorities is emblematic of violence, brutality, and the violation of fundamental human rights and human dignity of girls and women of the country. Jina Mahsa Amini's death resulted in spontaneous protests, which were led by women and the youth of Iran under the banner of Zan Zindagi Azadi, which means women, life, freedom. These protests quickly transformed into nationwide protests, spreading to 160 cities and in 31 provinces of Iran, with people from every community, girls, women, boys, men, and children, and people from all ethnic and religious and linguistic backgrounds joining these protests. Unfortunately, there has been a brutal response of the Iranian authorities towards these protests. It is estimated that the use of lethal force by security forces has led to the deaths of at least 537 persons, including at least 68 children. Iranian authorities tried to shut down all avenues of freedom of expression, disrupting internet and censoring social media platforms. I am deeply disturbed at the reports of threats, arrests, and imprisonments of journalists for their critical and independent reporting, including in the context of the protests and indeed the subsequent suspected school poisonings affecting the health of thousands of schoolgirls. I'm absolutely horrified, shocked, and outraged that despite appeals by the international community, including by my own mandate, Iranian authorities have thus far executed at least 7 persons associated with protests after arbitrary, summary, and sham trials, which violated the right to fair trial and due process rights. These summary executions are the symbol of a state ready to use all means to instill fear and to quash protests. I'm very concerned that several other individuals currently face charges that carry the death penalty. I'm alarmed at the reports of targeting and victimization and persecution of ethnic, linguistic, and religious minorities. It was extremely tragic to note that ethnic and religious minorities who've suffered decades of systemic and systematic discrimination and persecution have been disproportionately impacted in the current wave of repression led by and brought upon by the Iranian authorities. The Iranian authorities have unfortunately also weaponized the death penalty as an instrument of fear and repression. This includes the disproportionate execution of ethnic and religious minority prisoners, as well as an alarming number of persons executed on drug-related offenses. My report to the Human Rights Council last year in March, that is March 2022, and March 2023, have firmly established my conclusions that there is an absence of accountability for serious human rights violations and for crimes under international law within the political, constitutional, and legal system of Iran. In my view, the scale and gravity of the violations committed by the Iranian authorities, especially since the death of Ms. Amini, points to the possible commission of international crimes, notably the crimes against humanity of murder, imprisonment, and forced disappearances, torture, rape, and sexual violence and persecution. And so, what about any investigations and establishing accountability for serious violations of human rights in Iran? Unfortunately, as I pointed out, none of the investigations or attempts to establish accountability has taken place in the country. There has been a governmental failure to conduct any independent, impartial, and transparent investigations into the murderous acts, which includes the murder of Gina Mahsa Amini, but the over 500 persons, including children. There is no accountability for these murderous acts, these killings, and brutality, and the perpetrators have not been held accountable. Instead, there is continuing repression, harassment, and detention of human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, and students, which has increased in the past few months. Family members of individuals that were executed in connection with the protests were summoned to court or detained in Iran for asking for justice. Also, in the past few weeks, the authorities have detained dozens of human rights defenders in what appears to be a concerted effort to quash any protests in advance of the anniversary of the September 2022 death of Ms. Amini, which had, as you have just been told, triggered the nationwide demonstrations. Regrettably, the authorities have prevented Mahsa Amini's family for commemorating the anniversary of her death. This was so tragic and so painful. There are also reports of sporadic protests in the country over the weekend amid very heavy presence of police and security forces all across Iran. And I am deeply concerned at the current ongoing situation and what it could develop into, because the state is determined to use brutality and to repress the people of Iran. I end here, and I would be happy to take any questions from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Special Rapporteur Mr. Rehman. We are now proceeding as follows. We will have one speaker per group. Go back to you for a response. We know that you have to see then the Human Rights Council, which you have to attend, and I will bring in Gilda and Azadeh to address us for further discussions. And our first speaker is David Lega for the PPE.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Mr. Rehman, for taking the time to having this discussion with us today. I mean, it's extremely important that we don't forget or keep quiet about the situation 1 year after Ms. Amini was so brutally murdered by the regime, as you said, because she wore the hijab the wrong way. And we all know that the protests are still going on and that the people of Iran have had enough. And I must say that I am appalled by the Iranian regime's ongoing crackdown on demonstrators in Iran who are fighting for their freedom and even for their lives. And we cannot forget, performing this crackdown by the Iranian regime is none other than the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. And this is the same group that I and others have called for a terrorist designation of during several occasions, and so has this Parliament repeatedly done. I think that it's, frankly speaking, almost hypocritical for the EU to say that we stand with the women of Iran, but then not designating the IRGC as terrorists. But my two questions to you are, do you see any problems having an Iranian regime representative chair of the UN Human Rights Council Social Forum in November this year, while the decision has been criticized by several countries, and also while the UNHRC is by themselves investigating the regime's violations? And also the final one, while searching around and preparing this, I couldn't find any UN statements or press releases regarding the IRGC's crackdown on the protests in the aftermath of the killing. Has the UN made any, and if not, why? Thank you so much.
Thanks, David. For the S&D, Dietmar Köster.
Thank you very much for your presentation. First of all, I would like to underline that this is a regime which is acting against its own citizens. There is no doubt about this. This regime is still doing a really cruel job. Still, the death penalty is put in place, and this regime committed crimes against humanity. And still, we have a lot of cases of public executions, and this is not acceptable for all civil and democratic societies. And they are committing, as you have mentioned already, human crimes. And so, for me, the question, what can we do to make those people accountable, what they are doing to oppress their own citizens? And for me, as my colleague David Lega has mentioned, we in the European Parliament are demanding that the Revolutionary Guard must be put on the terror list. I think this must be a clear signal. We demand this in the European Parliament, and I would like to know how you would assess this. And last but not least, we have to keep in mind that this regime is not only a misogynist regime, it is an anti-Semitic regime, and it wants to develop nuclear weapons with the goal to destroy Israel. And I would like to know how what your opinion is on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Dietmar. Munir Satouri pour les Verts.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much, Rapporteur, for your remarks. A year on from the assassination of Mahsa, the situation is still extremely complex in Iran. In August 2023, a former elite guard from the Guardian of the Revolution had been brought before the courts by 2 NGOs for torture. But he's now the president of the Iranian Paralympic Committee, and he actually obtained a visa to travel to France for the Olympic Games in 2024. How is this possible? It's totally unacceptable in my view. Are you in touch with the Council to ensure that that list of people in the sanctions from the EU for human rights violations is being updated? And I have a question on what we can do. The Greens here in this House had called on member states to step up when it came to opening the borders to people who were being persecuted. That's one way of supporting the movement in Iran. Do you share the view that the EU and the member states could be doing much more when it comes to providing protection and welcoming, as well as providing humanitarian visas to those who seek these visas from Iran? Thank you.
Merci, Munir. Since all of our colleagues were questioning very disciplined, we can have a quick second round, a very quick second round. And the first is Janina Ochowska, and I see also Nacho for the S&D. Janina.
Yes, thank you. I will be very short. My two precedent colleagues, they asked the same questions. What we can do, really, how we can change this situation, which influence we can have on the situation of Iranian women, girls, and Iranian people. Thank you.
Thank you. Nacho, please.
Yeah, I have a very simple question. Now we are having in many TV broadcasts a lot of programs about the anniversary of the holiday. And one of them, I think, is BBC. There was a portrayal of the resistance of the women to the veil, saying, I think it's more or less was the same word, there are more and more women not veiled on the streets. What means that? Is this kind of flexibility? Is only the resistance? What is the policy? The same in big cities than in rural areas? Could you please have an insight in this situation? Thank you.
Okay, so far, and now we go immediately back to Rabait Rehman, our UN Special Rapporteur, for a response to the questions from our colleagues.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now, I will try to be as precise and brief as is possible. Some very important questions have been raised. So let me first begin by saying on the issue of the women and girls on Iran. You see, what I say that what's happening in Iran is not simply discrimination or persecution of women and girls. It is effectively gender apartheid. You see, if you look at the policies and the way women are humiliated, degraded, and persecuted, we must make a point to say that this is unacceptable. All of us, all men and women of the world, people from all religions, including Muslim men and women, must regard this policy of enforced hijab unacceptable and call this form of repression of women in a country like Iran, but also Afghanistan. This kind of treatment must be established as gender apartheid. A related point is on the issue of, because women and girls in Iran have stood up in many parts of the country, effectively, this is a civil disobedience movement. The regime is making new laws, more repressive than ever before, but simply because the women and girls of Iran are so brave, they do not accept it anymore. So we have to support all of these brave women and girls in not following an unjust, unnatural, and repressive law. So that's one point. On the broader issue of what we should do, I believe that it's very important that we support the people of Iran in whatever way, shape, or form we can in their democratic aspirations, because they are democratic people. They want to have the right to determine their own destiny. And the important element is that we have also got to be honest with ourselves, you see. In my own view, I think we have to make a decision. Do we prioritize human rights, or do we work on the basis of some kind of a negotiated settlement with an oppressive, authoritarian, dictatorial regime, which has, in my view, committed gross violations of human rights law, including crimes against humanity. So it is very important for this August Forum to make a decision to say to the world, to tell the European Parliament that human rights must be our priority. We must not make any deals. We must not negotiate with a murderous regime. And therefore, we must support the people of Iran. And that connects to several other issues that has been raised about the position of IRGC. Now, this is up to individual member states, and this is up to the European Parliament to make a decision. They have all of the evidence that is available, and my offices are there, and so are many other forms of evidence, testimonies, and documentation for them to realize the extent of murderous acts that have been committed and are being committed by the IRGC. So we have to make a decision as to where we see the place of human rights in any form of discussions with Iran. And the same applies to the social forum, having a social forum where Iran has the presidency. And I would urge member states and the European Parliament to reach out to the Human Rights Council and to the President of the Human Rights Council to reflect their disappointment and to say, well, this is not something that we would want Iran to be leading up to, and therefore this decision must be reconsidered. I end here, but I'd be happy to take any further supplementary questions. Thank you.
Mr. Rehman, we are totally happy that you are with us today. This is the clear language. This is the clear language we know from you, and we appreciate that a lot. We wish you courage and success, because we need that, the people of Iran need that, and you are in a key position where you really are ready, and this is what we hear whenever we are talking to you, to deliver properly at the very best. I can say for the European Parliament, we have made up our mind. The European Parliament has taken its decision. We have been clear on the way in which the Revolutionary Guard should be treated. Because we were saying in our resolutions, it should be that way, because our argument is, look, if those guys are not to be put on the list of terrorist groups, who would you like to put on that list? And we are waiting the member states to act according to the resolutions of the European Parliament. This is the situation today. We would wish that all institutions would have the clear language that you have and that the European Parliament have, and we will work towards that direction. Please allow me now to bring in our guests from the wider spectrum of those who can have a huge impact on this situation. That is Gilda Sahibi. She's a journalist and author and expert of our situation in of the women in Iran, and Azadeh Kian, a sociologist from Paris. Thanks for your patience, dear guests, and we are looking forward. You have already realized that the questions of my colleagues concentrate not only on the analysis, what is the situation like, what is your take, what are the recent developments, but it's also focusing what can be done and what can we do within the European institutions to support the movement for freedom and democracy. Can I ask whether we have Gilda Sahibi with us? Welcome to us and to our discussion today. And please take the floor for 8 minutes. And then right after you, I will invite Azadeh Kian and open for new rounds of conversation with my colleagues.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Subcommittee Human Rights. And it was very interesting also to listen to Mr. Rehman about his his thoughts and how he sees the situation at the moment. I would like to tell you a bit about the current situation, because I've been in touch with a lot of people in Iran in the past week, ahead of the protest, but also after. And then I would like to say some things about the politics, European politics. So what I can say from people in Iran right now, before the protests, there were some positive things and some negative things. So what is positive is that people tell me within this past year, the people of Iran have really come together. And we have heard some of that, because this Iranian regime, what it does best is to divide people. And it's been doing that for 44 years. And in this past year, because Jina Mahsa Amini was Kurdish, and the ethnic minorities are and have been suppressed way more than even the rest of society and of the people. And there has never really been this feeling of we belong together, but this past year really has brought people together. They tell me that they walk on the streets and they smile at each other, people they don't know, because there is a feeling of the only chance that we have is if we walk together, if we fight together, and that is something that has changed. Something else that has changed in this past year is the position basically of women in this country, because women have been at the forefront of this protest. It's not only been women, it's been men. The LGBTIQ community has also gained a lot of visibility in this past year. And still women have held the flag, as one protester told me. He told me that he grew up in this basically patriarchy, where he learned that men have to protect women and, just be men basically. And he said, and then he was on the streets during these protests, and he saw these young women and girls incredibly strong and just set on what they want, their freedom and equality. And he said, I realized the only thing that I can do is to support them, and they're the one who are leading us. And so one woman told me that she feels like women are more respected. And a lot of people in Iran have realized that the only way that this regime is going to fall is by women life freedom, because the hatred towards women, towards minorities, is the basis and the foundation of this government and of this regime. So the way to be free from this regime will be through the liberation of exactly these groups. And I think a lot of people have come to understand this. And this is the strength behind this movement. What has not been negative, and that's what I heard from all of them, everyone I talked to in the past couple of weeks, is the anger towards especially the West. One person, he had been in a torture cell in the fall, in one of these clandestine torture sites that are all around the country. And he told me, and he raised his voice, he was very emotional, he said, you people, you stood in the parliaments, you cut your hair, you talked and you talked. What have you actually done? And I did not have an answer, because and I'm aware that the European Parliament, of course, has been way stronger in their demands, and I also think in their analysis towards what's happening in Iran. And yet, of course, it is the member states and the governments of the European countries that are going to determine how they act towards Iran. And one thing that is missing in this, in their policies, is unity. We see this very, very clearly when it comes to political prisoners, European political prisoners. So in the country where I'm based, in Germany, the government doesn't even call them political prisoners, and they don't publicly demand the release of them. There are at least 2 Germans in Iran in prison, German Iranians actually. And there have been prisoner swaps. The one terrorist who was sentenced to 20 years in prison in Belgium, he was freed for a Belgian citizen. And part of this deal were also Irish, French, and Danish citizens. And the Iranian regime really knows how to use this lack of unity inside of the European Union, because, as I said, the thing that this regime does best is divide. And the only chance also the European Union has is if they're united. And I think, as with all or many issues in the European Union, there are member states that do not care a lot about human rights, about justice, about a fair justice system, trials, accountability, everything that we heard that is missing in Iran. And what I think is that this is nothing that is going to change quickly, but I think the way the European Union has behaved and acted in this year of protest in Iran could be the chance to start to change this way of policies, of having policies, because, and we just heard it, and I just want to, I'm a political analyst, and I want to just make clear that I don't think what we just heard from Mr. Rehman, that we need to put human rights in the center of everything, is naive or not strategic. I think that's the only way that strategy works, because we've seen that in Russia, with Russia. If the European Union had reacted with sanctions in 2015 when Russia attacked Syria, in the same way that they are now attacking Ukraine, the chance of Russia doing that again in Ukraine, I think, would have been smaller. And I think if the European Union doesn't really start working on putting human rights in the center of every single policy, this whole situation is going to get worse and worse, and not only in Iran, but we see it in Iran now, because this is the kind of freedom movement and equality movement that politicians in the West, in the European Union, ask for in every speech that they give. There are people, and I talk to them every day, who know what equality is. They know what freedom is, and they know what democracy is, and they know that they, as every single other person on this planet, deserve that. And they are dying for this. I've talked to 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who say, I am willing to die for the next generation to be free. And I don't think there is a stronger statement to make clear how serious these people are. And if the European Union, who has won the Nobel Prize, which is not deserved, this shows the last year, this shows the policies at the borders of the European Union, if they really are serious about caring for human rights, and what else is there to care about, because we are all humans. It is about humans, it is about children, it is about families, women, LGBTIQ people. Then this is going to cause so many more problems for the rest of anything that is going to come. We see that in Ukraine, the global south, they tell us, our problems are not yours, but now your problems are supposed to be ours. And they have a point, because I think this is now, Iran for me is a wake-up call, because the European Union has not been able to support the Iranian people in their strive for freedom. And if the European Union doesn't see this as a wake-up call to put up structures so that human rights is not optional, but they have to be in the center. And this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. This is going to take time. This is going to take years, because it's a changing of minds, changing of structures, but it needs to start at some point. And I think this could be a start. And without unity, it is going to be very difficult, not only towards the Iranian regime, but towards any authoritarian regime in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gilda Sahibi. I would like to give you, colleagues, a technical information. Our next guest, Azadeh Kian, has some technical problems to be connected. So I would like to open the floor to discuss the contribution of Gilda and hope she can stay with us for the discussion. Gilda, I do not know whether you are aware of how important your contribution is to our debate. And we are serious, we, the Subcommittee of Human Rights, are extremely serious of your analysis and what you say, what you have to say, and what you underscore in your statement, the good and the bad. We heard both, and I'm pretty sure that we are ready to discussing that. My first question is from the PPE side. Who would like to take the floor? Please, Leopoldo.
Thank you, Gilda, for your time and insight on this tragedy. My question is, in some of your words, you seem to have discovered some resentment towards the West for not being active enough, I would say, in this suffering of the people of Iran. My question is anyone doing anything on the International Court of Justice to bring about some justice into very particular persons that are identified by committing the crimes themselves? Thank you.
And the next speaker comes from the Socialists and Democrats, Dietmar Köster.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Gilda, and our solidarity is with the movement in Iran, with the revolutionary movement, and I think we must do more here in the European Parliament and especially the European Union, the European Council, to overthrow this mullah regime. And you have mentioned that it is very important that the opposition must be united. I would like to know how would you assess the social economic situation in your country and which role trade unions are playing? I think one of the most important things is if you want to get rid of this regime, the question is on the table, how is it possible to organize a general strike or something like this? And I would like to know from you how you would assess this. And the second question is, probably some protesters are desperate and probably they are leaving the country. Is this a development at the moment?
Our next speaker is Munir.
Oui, juste en quelques mots.
Yes, a few words only. So thank you, first of all, for your statements. We do read a lot about these matters, but hearing from you personally is much more meaningful. I have a question. What can we do in concrete terms to help you? Do you have any specific, precise demands from MEPs? How can we support you? That's my question. Thank you.
It was Munir for the European Greens, and now we have Isabel from the PPE.
Je voudrais vraiment remercier.
Thank you. It was very moving to listen to you. I would also like to thank the Special Rapporteur for their work. Now, a year ago, in the very beginning of this occurrence, a colleague had said that she was hesitant as to what extent we should support action in this realm because of what had happened the time before. The results of former help had been murder, prison sentences, and the like, and we did not achieve the results that we had aimed for. And now we can see that the movement, as you have yourself described, is still very alive. And I think that is admirable. It is quite surprising, in fact, to see to what extent people can sacrifice so much to reach its aims. This, however, has been going on for a while, and what do you think will be held in the future? And then I would like to support my colleague in his question as to what concrete action we can take to support you. Thank you.
Okay, I hear that we now have Azadeh with us. She's connected, but allow me, because for systematic reasons, that we continue now in the speaking order for the colleagues, concluding by giving back the floor to Gilda to respond to this conversation. Then we are going to hear Azadeh Kian. Bienvenue, Azadeh, and have a new round of conversation. David Lega.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much, Ms. Sahebe, for joining us. It was very hard to think of questions when you were so crystal clear in all your interventions, so thank you for that. I do have some thoughts, and are a bit curious on your thoughts regarding the Iranian diaspora. How are they working and helping, and how can we, in better ways, help them? Because sometimes it's hard to know who to reach out to and how. So your thoughts on how joint they are in their organization and what we can do to support them would be interesting to hear more about. Thank you.
And finally, I cannot resist the challenge to ask a question myself, Gilda. The political analyst we are talking to, that is two challenges to miss the point, to ask you on three different dimensions. We got the sense of belonging, that was the positive part of your report, where people feel part of a society that would like to become free. And that is amazing to hear about that and to seeing that. But we also listen to the bad things, to the bad developments. And of course, for us, it's very important to hear also about the disappointment of what you call the West, because it's including the European Union and its institutions. Let me, for that reason, and this is not an apology, this is not an excuse, because I immediately understand what you mean, and I know that you are right, and that those who say that are right in many, many respects. But on behalf of my colleagues, many of us here in the European Parliament, as well as in national parliaments, took the decision on a totally individual track to commit themselves to sponsorships for political prisoners in Iran. In my case, and that is the work of my colleagues in my office, we were happy enough to receive a tortured prisoner in Germany 3 days ago to become a new citizen of Germany. You have no idea how happy my team is, how happy all the other colleagues are who have similar successes. But this is not an answer, and this is not an excuse, because that goes without saying what everybody should do who has some influence. What we try, and let me also ask on the institutional and also on the strategic dimension of the accusation, what we try to do as a subcommittee of human rights, we try to maneuver the European Parliament, and we were quite successfully doing that because our resolutions are clear. We have a clear-cut majority to put the Revolution Guard on the terrorist list, and we have clear-cut positions not to doing the wrong compromises in dealing with the regime. But we lack, obviously, the consent of the member states, because the member states are not doing what they can do, and you mentioned that for a member state which you know very well. Me too. So the political question is, on the institutional layer, what can we do to promote a political discourse in our member states which enables us within the European institutions to be more clear, more decisive, more proactive in supporting those who are victims, but also who are so courageously demanding their freedom in Iran. And the last element, that is what we discussed on the occasion of Nacho Amor's annual report on the situation of human rights. Earlier to this point today in the agenda, we see the reshuffling of power structures on the globe. We see the enlargement of the BRICS by members like the Iran, the Saudis and others, extremely human rights friendly regimes. Yeah? And we ask ourselves, how come that dedicated democracies like Brazil or like South Africa, who have suffered themselves from suppression, are lining up with these kind of countries for common interests, to form whatever they call it, a bloc or a group of interest, shared interests or whatever. And what do you think, as a political analyst, what do you think the European reaction will be? Of course, the Europeans will try institutionally to renegotiate with countries in reach to defend somehow what they think is about democracy and freedom, etc., etc. And here, your demand to put human rights in the center of everything, this is the conviction of our colleagues here in the Human Rights Subcommittee. We would subscribe immediately to what you are saying, but it's not too easy. It's not too easy to make it strategically key in the next 5 or 10 years, because this shifting power structure questions also the way, we will not give in 1 centimeter, but it questions also the way in which we talk about human rights, in which we try to implement human rights, and in which we fight for those who are our allies and most of the time victims in autocratic regimes. What is your take on that? Because it's too interesting what you are saying, so I like to question further.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question. I'm going to try to, because it's a lot of them, I'm going to try to go through all of them briefly. Let me just, because we didn't talk about the region and the foreign policy perspective, because I think that is a very interesting point. You mentioned the BRICS Plus. Iran has joined with Saudi Arabia and other states. And I think it's important to know when it comes to Iran that Iran would not have joined BRICS Plus weren't it for this political situation inside of the country. Because the Iranian regime has never been so shaken to their core in these 44 years. And that is very important to know. This is why they prepared so massively for this anniversary we had on Saturday. There were military all over the country, everywhere, and they will not be able to hold that up forever. So people are going to wait for the military to disappear, and then I think they're going to protest again. But I'm going to say a few words about the prospects. And also, you know that Saudi Arabia is #1 enemy to Iran, to the Iranian regime. It is up there with Israel. So taking the step of taking up diplomatic relations again with Saudi Arabia, also something this regime would not have done if it wasn't in a fragile state. And it is, don't get me wrong, it really, really is. There have been leaks, internal leaks, that showed how afraid the regime has been, and they still are. If they weren't, they wouldn't have put up this incredible military presence in the whole country. So this is something to know. So what the Iranian regime is scared of is that it's going to implode, because, as you know, the people don't have weapons, so it's not going to well, it's not going to happen that, there's going to be like a civil war and then the people win or the regime wins or whatever. That's not how it works. The only way for this regime, in my opinion, to fall is if its followers leave this government and this regime. They withdraw their support. I see it as like an onion, and you have the different layers of followers, and it's gonna have to dissolve. That's how it's gonna lose. That's how it's gonna fall. And that also goes to the question: what can we do? What can you do? I think because of this dynamics of having to see the regime basically implode, is putting attention on what is going on in Iran. And the European Parliament has been doing that a lot this past year. Because the only thing that's going to keep people from keep supporting this regime is their fear of being prosecuted or of even being killed at some point by its own people. Because people, and they say it's about 10 to 15% of the population, they support the regime because the regime gives them three things: money, power, and security. And when these three things are not given to them anymore, then they're not going to support them anymore. And this is what the regime is scared of. And what has changed in this past year is that we have finally looked into what has been happening in Iran for 44 years. Nothing of what has been happening in this past year is new. Amnesty International has given out yearly annual reports about exactly these same things that Mr. Rehman has been describing. But for the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic, we have seen the pictures of children that have been killed and raped, and women that have been imprisoned and beaten up. That was the first time, and that was the dangerous thing. So you mentioned the sponsorships, very, very important. We know that attention works. So the huge Iranian cyber army, they have a huge army, a cyber army. They spread out every day. And amongst other things, what they do is that they look which prisoner's name is floating out there. Is that prisoner getting attention? Do people protect him? If this prisoner is named, if we have pictures of this prisoner, then it is more likely for him to be treated better and to survive. So sponsorships are very, very important. Attention is very important to name the crimes, because the lack of accountability that we've talked about before is crucial for these people in the regime. And also, this regime is not North Korea. So, because there has been a very long tradition of people, and also inside the regime, traveling to the West, to North America, to Europe, because they have family ties. They have friends who live, Iranians, that live all around the world. And so the regime itself will never cut ties, like, for instance, North Korea. So this is where the European Union has an angle. They want to keep up ties. They do go to Russia, they do go to China, because they have to, because they will not survive without these two countries. But it is important to not underestimate the effect that the European Union can have. And at the same time, I want to say that, and I mentioned that, and that it is not, and I think you know that, of course, but it is not the task of the West to teach other countries democracy and and export democracy. We saw that in Iraq, that it goes horribly wrong, and in Afghanistan, because these people know themselves. They don't need to learn anything. They know sometimes even better than us. When I look at at right-wing parties in all across Europe and also in the European Parliament. So I think what's important is, when we look at dictatorships all around the world, authoritarian regimes, and the global South in general, you mentioned Brazil or South Africa, that we need to deal with them not in a way that, we give you something and then you give us something back, but in a way that we are aware that we live in a world that is intertwined, that is interdependent. And I think Europe has not understood that yet. I see that in the media, I see that in politics, and I think if we get to a point where this is more understanding of that we are connected, and not only because we were scared of refugees, but because we know that we will only be free if everyone is free, then I think this whole dynamic between the global north and the global south will change. And I think that's about the discourse. Iranian diaspora. So it's I think some of you probably have experienced that yourselves, maybe, that they are not exactly very united. And still what I've seen, at least in Germany, and I think in many states in Europe, is that incredible, many activists have been doing incredible work. They have founded Women Life Freedom Collectives all around the continent, and I think just to give them a platform, to let them speak, to let them be the voice of the people in Iran, I think that is very, very important because, as I said, attention. And the Islamic Republic is a very special case when it comes to that. It doesn't work with Russia, for instance, but with the Iranian regime, yes. They want to commit their crimes in darkness. And once we shed light, they are seen, and that changes things. And then you asked about unions. That is also very, very, very important because, of course, unions are forbidden in the Islamic Republic, but they exist, and they are very agile. They organize strikes. They've been doing that for years. And the question of general strikes is very, very important. We had, for the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic, we had a general strike all across the country in the beginning of December. That never happened before. And of course, the problem are sanctions, because these people need money to be able to strike, but we cannot give money to Iran. So we have the issue of a lot of sanctions that in the end punish the people, and way too few sanctions that punish the people who are committing crimes. So there's just a disbalance that needs to be fixed. And again, of course, these are the member states that have to do that. People leaving the country, very few indeed. So I've talked to people who've been in prison in the last year, and they told me, once I got out of prison, I want to leave the country less, because that's the coming together that I mentioned. They want to support one another. They don't want to leave. And at the same time, it is very, very important that we do help people who want to leave, who have to leave, because they are threatened. Their lives are threatened. Their families' lives are threatened. I have had a few cases myself that I gave to members of parliament in Germany. If you have any chance to help, please do, because they are in danger. They do need to get out. It's a minority. I don't think there will ever be a flood of refugees from Iran. It's just not something that they want to do, because from what I've observed, they want to stay and they want to be free in their own country. And to end with, how is it going to go on? As I mentioned, I think the people are going to wait until the regime does not expect more protests, because they were expecting it for their anniversary, and that's why people tried to protest, but it was just impossible. A friend of mine in Isfahan told me it's like a war zone. There's no way of walking even around. I'm convinced that this regime is going to fall. I have no idea how long it's going to take. I think it is absolutely impossible for a government to only govern with violence forever. I think it's impossible for a government to govern against 85 to 90 people of their population. And yet, they have all the weapons. They have all the power. And so they will kill until their last breath. And I think it is going to take longer than we would hope for, and certainly the Iranian people would hope for.
Thank you so much, Gilda, for this rich conversation. I will now invite Asadeh Kian to join us for the last round. But Gilda, if you would like to stay in this conversation, we appreciate. In any case, we would like to stay in touch. I could say that for all the colleagues here in the Human Rights Subcommittee of the European Parliament. There will be occasions to continue our conversation. Welcome, Azadeh Kian, sociologist and expert on Iran and women's rights, Université Paris-Cité. You have the floor for some 8 minutes. Can we support her? Let me give the floor again to Azadeh Kian from the University of Paris-Cité. Can you hear us? Can you see us? Unfortunately, there is no direct connection. What can we do? Let me ask our technicians. How can we support our speaker? Pardon? Do it, please, yes. Colleagues, some patience. We have technical problems.
I can hear now.
Are you with us now? Yes? Could you say something?
Yes. Yes, hi. Good afternoon.
Perfect. We are waiting for your contribution. Thanks for being with us today. And you have heard we are on the situation in Iran. We are on the situation 1 year after the murder that has shaken Iranian society and the whole world. Please address us and then we enter into a discussion.
Yes. Actually, sorry, I had a conference here and couldn't hear Javid Rahman and only parts of Gilda Sahibi's answers to her questions, but I very much agree with her. So let me just begin by saying that maybe I should speak in French for a change, that le mouvement, en fait, l'année dernière,
Last year, I'm afraid the sound is cutting in and out. The movement started last year with the murder of Mahsa Amini. I'm afraid the sound is cutting in and out.
Par le chef des forces de police. Dans les deux cas, on était face à deux jeunes femmes qui également appartenaient aux minorités ethniques et religieuses du pays parce que les deux étaient sunnites et le sont. Donc, ce que je veux dire par là, c'est que c'est la première fois ce qui s'est passé en Iran. Vous savez, l'Iran a eu énormément mouvements sociaux par le passé, mais pour la première fois depuis les plusieurs décennies en tout cas, c'est la première fois que ce mouvement a réuni en son sein à la fois les hommes, mais également les femmes. Le mouvement est initié par les femmes, mais également les minorités ethniques et religieuses ensemble. Eh bien, il et elle ont demandé le.
Wait 1 second, because we lost the translation for those colleagues who are not able to follow in French. Is it perhaps an idea? No, then we do not have any translation if you shut down the pictures. Can we do anything on the visual connection? Because as I said at the beginning of our meeting, our interpreters are not able to translate anything where they do not have depicts properly suitable to read also the lips. Can we do and work something on that? Otherwise, we decide to follow in French. Could you so that we get you? Just a second, just a second. So, colleagues, the technical information is that we are not able to restore picture and sound. So the decision is that we invite our guests to continue in French, knowing that our interpreters will not be able to give us a translation. So we leave it in the French original language. Those who are happy with that are able then to comment and to communicate, but we have to close anyhow in some 15 minutes. So let us finalize that as good as we can. And thank already Azadeh Kian for being with us against all odds, against all technical problems that we would like to overcome. Vous prenez la parole en français, OK?
Ajouter juste quelques éléments, en particulier dans les questions que j'ai entendues poser à Madame Saïbi. Je voudrais dire qu'il y a encore énormément de possibilités pour faire pression sur le régime islamique d'Iran de la part des pays occidentaux, y compris l'Europe, parce que on le sait, je suis d'accord avec elle, raison pour laquelle je ne vais pas reprendre les arguments, puisque on sait que la majorité écrasante de la population iranienne ne veut plus de ce régime, même si tout le monde ne descend pas dans la rue. C'est à mon avis du fait si tout le monde ne manifeste pas et ne prend pas le risque de se faire tuer, c'est aussi parce qu'il n'y a pas pour l'instant une alternative politique encore considérée comme viable et fiable par la majorité de la population. Mais cette population s'est montrée contre ce régime. Vous n'êtes pas sans savoir qu'il y a eu aussi des sondages en Iran même l'année dernière qui le montraient et le soulèvement de l'année dernière a été considéré comme la menace la plus importante au régime. Et encore récemment, le chef des gardiens de la révolution de Téhéran a annoncé que si à nouveau les gens descendaient dans la rue, on ne pouvait plus les contrôler, raison pour laquelle la répression a été féroce. Il y a eu l'état de siège, moi aussi j'ai eu des témoignages à Téhéran, mais aussi dans beaucoup d'autres villes iraniennes, y compris les villes kurdes. L'armée et les gardiens de la révolution s'étaient installés afin d'empêcher les gens de descendre dans la rue. Maintenant, et je voudrais insister là-dessus, c'est un mouvement très important qui non seulement revendique le changement du régime, mais aussi c'est un mouvement qui est contre l'islam politique au pouvoir depuis les 44 dernières années. C'est un mouvement très important que j'appelle d'ailleurs un processus révolutionnaire qui est pour la laïcité, pour l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes, mais également entre les minorités et la majorité religieuse et ethnique, et pour la liberté et la démocratie. Et comme disait Paul Éluard, la liberté dont le nom est chanté vraiment partout en Iran. Et donc, il me semble que c'est un devoir des pays occidentaux, en particulier, je parle de l'Europe, je parle de l'Amérique du Nord, des pays qui se disent démocratiques et qui défendent ces valeurs-là, c'est-à-dire la démocratie, l'égalité, la laïcité, de défendre et de soutenir ce mouvement. Alors, comment? Par exemple, en gelant les avoirs des 50 000 personnes issues ou proches de ce régime, c'est-à-dire qui pas seulement qui sont en Iran, mais également qui sont en Europe, au Canada en particulier, aux États-Unis de temps en temps, qui ont des entreprises et qui travaillent avec l'Iran, par exemple. Vous savez que si vous êtes aujourd'hui iranien lambda, vous avez du mal à ouvrir un compte en banque. Mais si vous êtes millionnaire ou milliardaire, c'est-à-dire proche du régime, vous le faites facilement. Donc, pourquoi est-ce que vous ne pouvez pas, enfin, les pays occidentaux ne veulent pas geler les avoirs de ces gens-là en Europe et donc aux États-Unis. Ça, c'est une façon de faire pression sur ce régime. Une autre façon de faire pression, c'est justement c'est ce qui a été fait par rapport à la Commission des femmes des Nations Unies lorsque, fort heureusement, le régime islamique a été exclu de la Commission des femmes des Nations Unies. Il faut exclure le régime des commissions des droits humains, commission de défense des droits de l'enfant, etc., parce que c'est être membre de ces commissions par le régime islamique est vraiment, comment dire, c'est contre nature, et donc ça c'est quelque chose que, comme on l'a pu voir pour la Commission des femmes, les démocraties occidentales peuvent le faire à condition d'être unis dans leur volonté. Je pense qu'il n'y a pas de volonté politique à l'heure actuelle réellement de soutenir la société iranienne et la volonté de cette société parce que l'Iran est, vous le savez, le premier pays qui a emmené un régime islamique au pouvoir en 1979, et ce qui se passe aujourd'hui en Iran, c'est la première tentative mondiale d'aller à l'encontre de l'islam politique, et bien évidemment les retombées seront, à mon sens, non seulement régionales, mais également, pourquoi pas, internationales. Et donc, raison pour laquelle, encore une fois, c'est un devoir pour moi de soutenir la société iranienne à travers les mesures à la disposition d'une partie de la communauté internationale. Voilà, je m'arrête là, je suis absolument désolée, comme je dois partir, je préfère pouvoir répondre à quelques questions. Merci.
Many thanks for your energy that you were staying with us, Azadeh Kian, against all technical problems. We heard you, and we heard that you have confirmed the observations of Gilda Sahibi, but you also raised the question, how can we more and more put pressure on the regime by using our economic relations, by using our political and diplomatic influence, and by also not only working on the European institutions, but also on the framework of the United Nations to come to consequences for the regime, to, by doing so, also to enlarge the space of freedom and the conditions for the fight in Iran. We also know that you have to rush forward because you have to catch a train. So I would like to ask my colleagues to be very, very brief. Bernard, I see, is the first colleague who would like to raise a comment or a question.
Voilà. Pardon. Bonjour madame. Une remarque et une question.
Good afternoon. Well, I've got a comment and a question. My comment is that, including during the Cold War, when Western countries were putting huge pressure on communist countries, not just the USSR but also Central Europe, well, it never came down to external pressure to get rid of these regimes and bring them down. It was the social movements within these countries and the brutal degradation of the economic situation with regard to the USSR that brought it to its end. Now on to my question. When we see photos of the streets of Tehran today, it appears quite frequent to see young women, or indeed women of any age, to be walking along the street without a headscarf on. Now, as far as you're aware, are there many women who do this? And what happens to them if they make this choice? Are they arrested? Are they harassed? Or both? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
With an eye on your timetable, we leave it like that and hope you